Well, good morning, everyone, and let me say thank you for what you do on behalf of the Americas. It's an honor to address all of you this morning, and it's humbling to receive this award. I think a lot of you know I come from a big family, 12 of us, and my dad owned a bar. You know, I'm the last guy in the world who ought to be here today addressing all of you. But I am happy to be here, and you know, as the council notes, its members share a common commitment to economic and social development, open markets, the rule of law, democracy throughout the Western Hemisphere. And these are the principles that have shaped the course of many nations in our region, including the United States. And these are the principles upon which the future of the Americas must rest, in my opinion. And I stand before you today as an admirer of Latin America and the believer in the big potential of our hemisphere. I'm a believer in the power of free markets and free people, and a student of how both together have transformed the nations of the Americans and positioned us for the future. You know, the free enterprise system gave my family the opportunity to succeed. And it's done the same for generations of families throughout our hemisphere when it has been allowed to flourish. I was and am a strong supporter of NAFTA, CAFTA, our trade agreements with Peru and Chile, which have led to greater prosperity and security throughout the region. I was and am a strong supporter of Plan Colombia and the Merida Initiative, which have been instrumental in securing those gains. And I've had the honor of serving as Speaker of the House now for about a year and a half. And with my colleagues, when we took over the House, we did so with a lengthy agenda focused on jobs and focused on the economy. And most of our agenda has now been passed by the House, and in spite of the challenges of a divided government, some of it has been enacted into law. And I'm pleased to say this includes the free trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, that were stalled for years under the previous majority in the House. And I think, as you've heard, shortly after I was elected by my colleagues to serve as the Speaker-designate for the 112th Congress, President Obama and I had a conversation about trade. And at the time, the United States had free trade agreements pending with South Korea, Panama, and Colombia. And the President and I agreed that enacting these would support job creation in the United States. And the President mentioned the idea of moving ahead on one of them, South Korea. And depending upon how that went, maybe we'd talk about moving the others. Well, for those of you who don't know me real well, what you see is what you get. I'm a pretty straightforward guy. And I told the President that we needed to move all of them at once. Having watched for 20 years the challenges of moving free trade agreements through the Congress, I believe that doing all three at once, let's just do one heavy lift, and frankly, it was the right thing to do. And the fact is that over the years, we've done these in the order in which they were negotiated. And so eventually, to his credit, he did. In October of 2012, the House and Senate overwhelmingly passed all three trade agreements. And just last month, the President stood with President Santos in Cartagena to announce that the Colombia Free Trade Agreement will formally take effect here very soon. In January, just 3 months after the passage of these agreements, I led a bipartisan delegation to Latin America focused on our economic and security partnerships in the region. One of the highlights of this trip was presenting President Santos and our ambassador to Colombia, Michael McKinley, with framed red line copies of the signed Colombia Free Trade Agreements. And the emotion that I saw from both men when they were presented with this symbolic gift was clearly genuine. It spoke volumes about the importance of the agreement for the people of both countries and the hard work that went into enacting this agreement on both sides. And the impression was reinforced a day later when, upon learning of our delegation's visit to Colombia, President Martinelli made an unscheduled trip from Panama City to join us as a guest of President Santos. President Martinelli knew that we were going to be talking about implementation of the free trade agreements, and he wanted to be there. President Martinelli made that impromptu journey across the South Caribbean Sea for the same reason I made my own trip to Latin America, because the friendship and economic partnership amongst our countries is vital to the future of the region. And when the Colombia Free Trade Agreement enters into force this month, it'll be an important moment for our hemisphere. And it's equally important that the Panama Free Trade Agreement be fully implemented in the months ahead. These trade agreements are a tangible manifestation of how the United States views the region. They are a roadmap for an enduring partnership amongst our allies working together as respected and trusted partners. And it's important that we keep the momentum going. I am disappointed the administration has not moved to build on these achievements by seeking trade promotion authority. TPA would help ensure a continued expansion of free trade and open markets to support job creation here at home and abroad. Trade, though, is but one vital component of our relationship. Without a sustained political commitment to a common vision based on respect, dignity, and opportunity, the main narrative will continue to be the contest for leadership in Latin America and how the U.S. interacts with the competing blocs. You know, during my visit to Latin America, I saw vibrant nations brimming with the promise of prosperity, security, and democracy. And the nations of the Americas share a hemisphere, but we also share a lot more than that. We share a respect for democracy and an appreciation for the superiority of a free economy. We also share an opportunity, a chance to secure freedom, prosperity, and security for all of our people by working together. You know, free market capitalism, representative democracy go hand in hand, and they have worked hand in hand to lift nations out of chaos and into competitiveness. I returned from Latin America convinced that our objective should be to make the entire Western Hemisphere a free enterprise zone, free markets, free trade, and free people. And I had a vision of neighbor countries, each with a distinct identity and a unique national character, but with a shared ironclad commitment to freedom and democracy. It's an attainable vision, but challenges do exist. And I believe there are three major threats. The first such threat is Iran, which has made little attempt to disguise its global ambitions or its interest in gaining a foothold in Latin America that can serve as a base of support for those ambitions. The same week, our delegation was visiting Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. Another foreign leader was conducting a Latin American mission as well. That leader was from Iran. It was telling that his itinerary included none of the nations that we visited, including Brazil, which, to her great credit, has spurned Iran's advances. Instead, Brazil has opted to pursue a path that demonstrates that it seeks responsible leadership, a role on the global stage, a role that corresponds with its considerable economic potential and its role in the region. And indeed, while I and the members of our delegation were visiting these three Latin American democracies, the president of Iran was being hosted by nations such as Venezuela and Cuba, whose governments have been linked to state-sponsored terrorism and have isolated themselves internationally. I think his trip underscored the designs that Iran has for expanding its influence in Latin America and its eagerness to force bonds with governments in the Western Hemisphere that have demonstrated a lesser interest in freedom and democracy. And while the influence of Iran and these other rogue nations represents the external threat to prosperity in the Americas, there also continues to be a threat from within. And this is a second challenge. The ongoing threat posed by international drug cartels, anti-democratic insurgents, and international drug cartels, transnational criminal organizations, they've all long sought to destabilize Latin America and its democratic nations' economies. There's been unmistakable progress made in the fight against lawlessness in Latin America. I witnessed it firsthand this winter. In Colombia, Mexico, I saw the aggressive, state-of-the-art methods being employed by the national police forces in those nations, often using U.S.-built or supplied technology. Support for U.S. engagement in these vital efforts has traditionally been bipartisan, starting with Plan Colombia, implemented under President Bill Clinton and former Speaker Denny Hastert, and the Merida Initiative, set in motion by President George W. Bush. For more than a decade, a major focus of the United States has been to partner with countries whose governments struggle to maintain legitimate state authority over significant portions of their territory. And when our neighbors have faced these situations, we've worked with them to develop, adjust, fund, and execute the strategies that have been needed in order to stem the tide. These initiatives have largely been successful, but I do believe that the threat remains. We know from years of hard experience how insurgents, criminal gangs, and terrorist organizations operate when they're left to their own devices. They form transactional relationships to leverage resources and create networks for their own survival, carving out zones that allow freedom of movement and operation outside of the government control. And we know such organizations can still spread rapidly in Latin America if they're left unchecked, partly because of the region's unique characteristics. The geographical proximity and close cultural connections amongst the countries, the uneven strengths of the central governments, and other factors lend themselves to a spillover effect in Latin America when such bad actors are given an opening in which they can exploit. And I think we have to continue to deny them any such opening. We have an unavoidable responsibility to anticipate this threat and to understand the potential for it to grow into a regional problem in Latin America, one that threatens the smaller countries in particular. And that leads me to the third and I think most serious challenge, which is that it's the one that we don't really want to talk about. The question mark that exists in many of the region's capitals regarding the future of the United States commitment to the region. There are voices in both American political parties calling for the United States to adopt a new posture of isolation and reduce our level of engagement in Latin America, arguing for a halt in aid to nations such as Colombia and Mexico. The head of the AFL-CIO has called on President Obama to shelve the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, as an example. And the Obama administration itself, even as touted the benefits of free trade with Colombia, has spoke of turning the page from Plan Colombia. Now, the threat of U.S. disengagement is the most serious of the three threats that I've identified, because if it occurs, the other two threats will multiply exponentially. This, in turn, will wipe out economic opportunities, not just for the United States, but for all nations in the hemisphere. The vision I have described, a community of nations committed to free people and free markets, will be in peril. And the best defense against an expansion of Iranian influence in Latin America and against the destructive aspirations of international criminals in the region is for the United States to double down on a policy of direct engagement. The economic potential of Latin America will never be reached if the force forces of lawlessness in the region sense that the United States is no longer engaged and committed to their eradication. For 12 years, Plan Colombia has been the vanguard, the manifestation of U.S. commitment to a secure, free, and prosperous region. And I think we learned important lessons from it. We learned that ongoing challenges to the sovereignty of the state were the foundational problems in Colombia. And we learned the solution required strengthening the state's control of its legitimate force and undercutting the adversary's ability to use force. We didn't do everything perfectly with Plan Colombia, but one point which we should all be very proud of is the special emphasis that we've placed on training the trainers, which gave our Colombian neighbors the ability to take the lead in providing for their own security. Colombia still has the second largest insurgency in the world, and we need to take that seriously because it's a threat to the people of Colombia and to the people of the region. At the same time, there's a shared consensus that Colombia has developed training capacity that can be appropriately shared with other like-minded nations in the region. Rather than drawing down our engagement, the United States should continue to support security assistance and training assistance for Colombia, for continued internal activities, for regional activities, and abroad. Now is not the time to turn the page on Plan Colombia. I think we need to renew our commitment and begin to write the next chapter. There must be no turning to the page until we've worked together to break the back of the threat once and for all. And in both Colombia and Mexico, the entire hemisphere, the U.S. must be clear that we will not disengage in the fight for free markets and free, secure people. We must be clear that we will be there with our friends and partners in the region, committed to fighting and winning the war for a free, stable, and prosperous hemisphere. I think we must also be clear about what we expect from all of our neighbors. We will insist that every nation honor the rule of law, meet its obligations, and respect international norms. That means paying debts to bondholders, honoring legal commitments, and the decisions made by international arbiters respecting private property. Some governments in the region have demonstrated an alarming willingness to drift away from such norms when it just happens to suit their objective. When this occurs, it's harmful not only to the people of those countries, but to the potential of all of the Americas, and it cannot be excused. You know, in making speeches, one is always admonished to know your audience. I'm saying to all the ears in this room, both domestic and international friends, that I'm committed to working to ensure that this partnership continues in terms of both policy and resources. And let me close with a little anecdote. Back in January, when our delegation traveled to Colombia, and we were at the presidential palace. We were there to meet with President Santos, but we arrived a bit early. So having a few minutes to kill, we strolled around the square where they had a very large Christmas tree. And the whole area was just teeming with people. Mother was walking by with a little 2-year-old girl, and as she was walking by me, she dropped her little Mickey Mouse doll. So, you know, I just happened to be standing there. I reached down and picked it up. Simple human reflex. Mother had her hands full. And dictated by nothing more than simple manners. Well, the next morning I woke up, and in the front section of Colombia's largest newspaper, there's a color photo of me picking up this little doll in the main square. Now, you know, I didn't plan that moment, but to me, it was probably worth 1,000 words in describing the relationship that we strive for amongst the neighbor nations in the Western Hemisphere. a relationship built on fundamental kindness and respect. And my steadfast resolve is to build on the success of the recent past so that one day in the near future, fundamental kindness and respect are the attitudes that are taken as given in this relationship. We should strive for the kind of relationship which we're never too busy to stop and help a neighbor, especially a young one, filled with dreams and a potential for the future. Free markets, free people are the key to a secure, prosperous future for all of the Americas. And it may seem like common sense, but usually the most important ones are the most obvious ones. Such as our relationship is with Latin America, it's a relationship vital to the future of our world. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I've had to be with all of you today and encourage you to keep up the work, continue to build the relationships to make our hemisphere a place where the whole world can emulate. Thank you.